This tutorial is going to show you how to start with a photo like this and use layer masks and blend modes and some other Photoshop techniques to end up making a photograph like this look like a watercolor painting like this. It's a pretty cool feature, and those of you that are artsy are going to really enjoy it. And those of you that aren't, you are going to still learn quite a bit in this. All right, but before we start, we have to set a couple things up. So the first thing I want you to do is go ahead and open up a browser and go to adobe.com and sign in with your account. Now, you are going to need to type in your email address here and then your password, which is the format should be capital W, lowercase g, your 6-digit ID number, and an exclamation point. Unless we specifically in class as a whole group attached your Adobe account to Google, and you would know if we did that because we would do it all together. I'm just not sure that everybody watching this video we did that for. You'll type that in here, then type in your password, and then sign in here. So I can click continue with Google because I've connected my account. But again, if we haven't done that for you, you can't do that yet. And then select West Geauga Middle School if it gives you a choice. Do not choose your personal profile. Choose West Geauga Middle School. And then, to be honest, you can just sort of minimize this. I'm just going to drag it out of the way for right now because we're going to come back to it in just a bit because we're going to need to install some fancy brushes and we need to be signed into our Adobe account to be able to do that. But the first thing we need to do before we do that is make sure our palettes are set up the way that we want. One of the things that you're going to want to have access to is the brush window. So go under Window and click on Brushes. That should bring your brushes in this little side panel right here where you can collapse and open them by clicking on them. There's two icons for the brush panel. You're going to be focusing more on the one that's on the bottom of the two, the kind of the two sideways brushes. When you click on that and expand it, you'll see you have some folders with different brushes. We're going to install an entire folder of special watercolor brushes here in just a second. But before we get to that, let's talk about the other thing you want to have for sure. You definitely want to have access to your history palette. Mine is currently in the middle here. Most of you probably have it like right here in this little thin side panel where you click it and expand it. That actually will work fine if it's there, because the nice thing about that is yours probably looks more like this. The nice thing is you can drag it, because this is a project where, for example, when we're done with this video, you're not going to have a finished project. I'm just going to show you the techniques, and then you're going to spend some time trying to make it look great. And this is a project where you end up changing your mind because you have to experiment. You'll see what I mean a little bit later, but you'll do 4 or 5 brush strokes and it looks good, and then all of a sudden it doesn't look very good anymore, and you want to go back in your history to fix to a point where you liked it. Again, I'll show you an example of that in the video. All right, so what we need to do now is install these brushes. So in this brush palette, when you expand it, click the little 4 bars in the expanded palette and choose Get More Brushes. This is going to launch a browser window, and I'll bring it over here. And since I'm signed in already, it takes me right to the page. If I wasn't signed in, it wouldn't take me to the correct page. It would take me to this page where the brushes are not available, and you would have to click that again, and it's a whole thing. So make sure you're signed in before we do that. Very top middle group is a set of watercolor brushes. There's a lot of really cool brushes on this page that you may want to play around with when this project is over, but for right now, click the download button for the watercolor brushes and just download it right into your Photoshop folder. You can see I've already done this a couple times, so I don't need to click save here, but just go ahead and save it to your Photoshop folder. I'm just going to cancel, but you would click save. I'll just click save because some of you might be watching the video without listening, so I'll just click save. All right, now I don't need this browser window anymore, so I'll just get rid of that. Now what I want to do is in Photoshop, in that same 4-bar menu, I want to choose Import Brushes. So I'm going to click that. Then I just need to navigate to the folder where I saved the brushes. So I saved it into my Photoshop folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and load those. And then you should see it's going to put in a new folder of these brushes. And there are so many of these brushes in here. I can't even scroll all the way to the bottom quickly. So I'm just going to stop scrolling and get started with the tutorial now. All right, so what you want to do is let's open an image. So go File, Open. You need to download an image that you want to do this with, whatever it is that that you think you would enjoy. Everybody should know the type of image I'm going to pull up right now. I'm going to pull up a bulldog image with this puppy. Adorable. Okay, here is the puppy. So before we get started, a couple things I want you to make sure of. Go to Image, Image Size. Just make sure your picture is, I would say, at least a width of about 1,000 pixels or so. I mean, if it's 900 something, that's fine. You just don't want the image to be too small. So it can be bigger. That's not a problem. But if it's too small, I think you'll have an issue with making this look the way that you want. So if it's really small, you should not try to resize it because it'll get all pixelated and grainy. Just go try to find another image similar to the one that you wanted to work on that's a better size. Then the other thing is in the image menu, go to Mode and double check that it is an 8-bit per channel, and RGB color would be best. This will allow us to apply some filters later. If it's not 8-bit, you'll need to, we won't be able to do it. So just check that 8-bit to switch it, and everything should be just fine. Okay, all right, so now let's go ahead and actually get started with this. So let's make a copy of the background layer. There's a couple ways you can do it. I'm just going to drag it to the plus sign to make that second copy, and then I'm going to turn the visibility of the background layer off. I'm going to right click on the background copy layer and convert it to a smart object. This will just allow me, if I mess anything up, to easily revert back to it. Once we've got that done, we're going to apply some filters to it. So we're going to go up to Filter, Filter Gallery. When this comes up, I'm going to already have some filters applied, so I'm just going to delete them. What we want to do is, this is a bunch of folders that have different effects. So the artistic folder is probably already open when you go to it. You're going to want to click on watercolor. And then for your brush detail, use values of 14, 0, and 3. Then what you want to do down at the bottom is click the plus sign. If you need to, you can collapse the artistic one and open the sketch one and click on water paper. The values for water paper are going to be 35, 65, and I'm using the tab key just to jump between them, and 65. And that looks terrible at the moment, but don't worry, we have some other things that we're going to do, so don't panic at the moment. Go ahead and click OK. The next thing we're going to do is go up to Filter. Again, make sure you're still on the background copy layer. And by the way, notice when we added these filters, it's put those attached to the copy. So go to your background copy layer. We're going to go to Filter, Blur, Smart Blur. We're just going to take some of the harshness out of this. Make your values here for your radius 15, for your threshold 100, and make sure the quality is high. And click OK. Last but not least, and this is going to really make you think you made a mistake, but I promise you didn't, go to Filter, Stylize, Find Edges. Don't panic. Everything's okay. We just need to make some adjustments now to the blend modes for these layers so that things will look a little bit better. So the first thing that we're going to do is, if you notice under the layer mask, or I'm sorry, under the layer, you have these filters that we've just applied. So what I want you to do is double click on the little icon that's next to the filters. So we're going to start with the bottom one, Filter Gallery. We're going to click on this icon that looks like lines with dots underneath it right here to the right. So we're going to double click that. We're going to just click OK. If you get a warning, you don't even need to read it. Don't worry about it. So for this one, we're going to change the blend mode of this layer. So where it says normal here, we're going to click on that. We're going to change that to soft light, and we're going to click OK. You can see how it's already changed a little bit when we did that. Then what we're going to do is double click on the Smart Blur icon. Again, you have to click on the little icon to the right, click OK on that warning. If you want, you can check the box that says stop giving you that warning. Okay, what we're going to do from this one is change the blend mode to this one to screen. And we're going to set the opacity to 50%. So this is showing in the preview window what it's going to look like here, but because we still have another, I'm just going to type in 50, another style on top. It's going to revert back to this, but we're about to fix that right now. And finally, we're going to double click on this icon by Find Edges. And we're going to change the blend mode here to multiply. And we're going to change the opacity to 50% again. And what you should see now is it does have kind of a watercolor effect. Now, if you're not happy with yours, perhaps the values for your image should be a little bit different. So you are certainly welcome to double click on any of these icons that are next to the image and see if changing the blend mode or the opacity makes it look a little bit better. I wouldn't actually change the blend mode, but maybe you can turn the opacity up and down to see if that ends up making your image look any better. And you can try that with all three of them. Keep in mind, though, that because these are sitting on top of each other, when you do something to the bottom one, you may not be as apparent because of the top one sitting on top of it until you adjust them all. Okay, next thing we need to do is we want to add a texture to this image that makes it look like it's actually on paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to go File. Well, actually what you need to do is you need to download an image that is on the web page, a paper texture that's on the web page. And mine is already downloaded. I'll show you here. It is in my Photoshop folder. And it's called watercolor paper right here. So download that from the web page into your Photoshop folder, and we're going to bring that in here. So we're going to go File, Place Embedded. I'm going to click on the watercolor paper and click Place. That's going to bring it in with these little boxes around it. I'm going to hold the Shift key down to kind of keep it in proportion. And I just want to stretch it so that it completely fills the image. It doesn't matter if it goes off a little bit. That'll be just fine. Then I'm going to hit Enter. Once I've done that, what I'm going to do is make sure I'm on the watercolor paper layer, and I'm going to change the blend mode here in the layers palette. I'm going to change it to multiply. See if you like the way that multiply looks. And again, it's giving a little bit of texture there. If you don't like multiply, try soft light and see if you like that any better. Personally, I don't for my image, so I'm going to keep mine on multiply. Now, I'm not really teaching about blend modes here in this because I'll be honest with you, I don't quite understand them. But the reality is what they're doing is they take an image and blend it with the layer below in a way that either makes it, for the most part, lighter or darker or contrast with the pixels that are underneath. It's very complicated mathematical stuff. And to be honest, I never know what's going to happen when I change these blend modes. You'll notice you can scroll up and down to see what it does to your image. Sometimes you get some really cool effects even if you don't quite understand why they're happening. But again, let's go with either multiply or soft light for this project. All right, so next what I need to do is click on the background copy layer, and we are going to add a layer mask to this. But I want you to hold down the Alt key and then click on the layer mask icon, which is the white rectangle with the black circle inside of it. That's going to add a layer mask to this, and it's going to temporarily make our bulldog disappear, or whatever's on whatever your picture is of. Make it disappear quickly. Now again, I'm not really teaching layer masks in this, but basically what a layer mask does is it attaches to an image and uses the colors of black through white, including every shade of gray, to either hide or show what is on the layer it's attached to. So black hides what's on the layer. So because the entire layer mask is filled with black, since I held the Alt key down, it's hiding everything on this layer. So the only thing I'm currently seeing is the watercolor paper texture from this top layer because I've turned the visibility of the background layer off. That's why I don't see that. If you forgot to do this, you'll still see the bulldog underneath, and you don't want that right now, so make sure that that is off right there. So what we're going to do is use these watercolor brushes to paint on the layer mask in the color white to start to reveal some parts of the image. This is where your history brush, or your history palette, I should say, is going to come into play because you'll end up doing things that look terrible, like I did, and you want to go back and get rid of those problematic things. So what I want you to do right now is, first of all, go ahead and make sure that over in your color picker, that white is your foreground color, because we're going to be painting on the layer mask with white. If you don't have white and black here, you should, now that that you have the layer mask selected. But if white is not your foreground color, You can click the curvy arrows to get it to be your foreground color. You can also hit the letter X on your keyboard to switch those around, but we need white to be the foreground color. Go ahead and open up your brushes, your watercolor brushes, and click on your brush tool. Make sure you're on the brush tool because there's a couple tools that look like the brush tool, like the history brush tool, the quick selection tool if you have that up there. So the brush tool is the one we want, and again, if you click on that, we want the top choice in the brush tool. All right, before we get started with revealing this image underneath, let's make sure we have a few things set up correctly. Number one, make sure that the layer mask is selected. It should have the little bracket around it. It should be completely black. You should have white as your foreground color, ready to paint. You're going to go into your brush picker and you're going to expand the watercolor folder, and you can take a look at all of the brushes you have here. So at this point, you're going to be doing a lot of experimentation with some of these brushes. But before we get started, I'm going to click on a brush, and then I want you to look up here at the top. When you click on a brush at the top of the menu here, you get a default size for each brush, and then more importantly, you get a mode for the brush. If I expand this mode here, you're going to notice there's these different paint modes or different overlay modes or blending modes is actually what it should be called that the brush will work with. So we're not really painting here. We're more revealing what's underneath this watercolor paper that we put in using this layer mask. So the secret to this is that some of these blend modes will result in nothing happening. And multiply, this particular brush I just picked, has a blend mode, default blend mode of multiply. If I go ahead and paint now on the layer mask here, nothing's happening. I don't really want to get into a long explanation of why that is, but just know that some of these blend modes, particularly the ones that are kind of grouped together, so most of these here, darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, you can see how they're in a group. Pretty much none of these will do anything in this particular project. So what you should experiment with is some of the other modes. Like for example, in this one, if I do lighten and start to paint, you can see how that brings in what's underneath. The question is, do I like that or not? Is the brush size right or not? I'm going to Control Z a couple times to get out of that. So play around when you pick a brush, play around with some of these values to see if you like the way it acts. The key that you'll notice is for most of the brushes is that if I go ahead and do lighten here, and I'm just going to pick a different brush. I don't really actually like this brush very much. I'm just going to scroll down and let's see what this one does. Okay, so the key here is with these watercolor brushes is that they will often behave, also notice the mode here is normal, they'll also behave like watercolors. So I just painted there. Now if I paint again, you should notice that where I painted over something twice, it got a little bit more vibrant, just like it would if you were actually using watercolor paints. Notice how my layer mask looks right now. So again, you're going to play around with size and mode for these brushes to get the effect that you want, and I encourage you to experiment. What you don't want to do is just grab a brush, set it to normal, and just reveal everything. Just paint over everything and reveal it. You really don't want to do that. This isn't going to look as good as you want it to look. Okay, so I'm doing Control Z, but what you would do in your let me expand the history here. So let's talk about this right now. So let's say you do this. At this point, you like what you have. Now you start painting with this next brush, and you do a little bit more, and you're like, you know what? It's getting worse. I don't like it as much anymore. So you go in your history palette, and you can click on, just like you select layers, you can select a point in your history where you liked what you had, and you can then continue from there. If I leave my history tool out, actually, so notice here it's on this step. If I paint now, notice it got rid of all the steps below that and kept the new one right here. So again, take some time to play around with brush size and blend mode to find something that works. All right, now let's talk about artistically what this project should look like when you are done. In this project, my suggestion is pick an area of of your image that is like the focal point. So for this one, it would be the bulldog's face. You want to really go over that part quite a bit to really bring it into focus and almost reveal it completely. And then what you want to do as you move away from the focal point is sort of have, as you move away, sort of less detailed as you move away from the image. So as you get away from the focal point, you want a little bit less detail painted in than you do. Now, I will tell you that I would not be happy with this here. You don't really want hard edges around it. So again, I might go around and play with my history tool to clean that up a little bit. I actually really like this brush I'm using right here. This is a good one. So you can see how some of them will bring in. Some of them you'll notice I did in the trial where it really just completely brought it in, where this one is a little bit paler. I really like how this one is working. I happen to be on the mode called screen. Maybe that's a good mode to use for these. But I would be unhappy with the way the edge of my image here by the face gets really clearly severe away from it. And I probably would go back in my history quite a bit. Honestly, I would probably just start over at this point with what I have with this and go from there. All right, but anyways, play around. Again, really experiment with these brushes. There's so many of them, and some of them do some really cool stuff in this project. You just never know what you're going to get until you play with it. But the key is if you do something with a brush and nothing happens, it's because the blend mode of the brush is these. I know these four here don't work. Dark and multiply, color, burn, linear burn. Nothing's going to happen with those. Most of these work, and then some of the groups, some of them work and some of them don't. You just have to play around and see what happens as you play with it. But have some fun with it and really try to make it look like a watercolor painting that you did with real watercolors and real paper. All right, good luck. Can't wait to see what you got.